This video is sponsored by Isolate, manufacturers of the mains conditioner and power cords used by a British audiophile. For more information about these and their other products, please click the link in the description. On this channel, I periodically like to draw your attention to small audio companies that wouldn't typically get a lot of love from the traditional hi-fi press, but there's hundreds of them out there, so how do I choose? Well, I do have my selection criteria. Firstly, they need to be available to purchase in the UK. I wouldn't be much of a British audiophile if they weren't, would I? Many sell direct as they're too small to attract dealers and distributors, like Canadian-based Heaven 11. Their Billy Mark II won my Best Amplifier Award in 2024 in the £1,000 to £3,000 price category. There also needs to be something interesting or at least innovative about the design. Another end-of-year award winner, the ARs from 3 Square Audio, have a step front baffle to mechanically time align the drivers rather than deploying more complex crossovers that disrupt phase coherence. Finally, the person behind the enterprise quite often is a one-man band with a couple of people helping out. Well, that person needs to have been doing it for a while. I don't want to encourage people to put their hard-earned cash into some fly-by-night organisation. The product I'm reviewing today fulfills all of these criteria. Find out why I'm excited about this one. The TX5s are the largest stand mounts offered by Alchris Audio, retailing for £1,750 a pair. The speakers are assembled with the cabinets hand-built in Alan Clark's workshop in West Yorkshire. His wife Chris looks after the operational side of things. 4 real wood veneer finishes are available. I requested walnut. Measurements are 450 by 210 by 340 millimeters and 11.5 kilograms, or 17.7 by 8.3 by 13.4 inches and 25.4 pounds. The TX5s deploy a 175mm 7-inch composite paper cone mid-woofer and a Foundtech pure ribbon tweeter, crossing over at 2000 Hz. The frequency response is stated from 30 Hz at -3 dB in room up to 40,000 Hz. The opening on the front looks like it has teeth big enough to be an apex predator. It's actually to control the airflow from the end of the transmission line, generated by the back wave of the mid-bass driver. On the rear are one set of decent speaker binding posts. No ferrous materials are used as they cause eddy currents, increasing distortion. Even the binding post washers are copper. I like transmission line speakers. They're more complex to design and build than most other speaker topologies, but if designed correctly, they produce deep, clean bass and very little bleed through to the mids. At least that's my experience. Here's a cut through of the TX5s. The backwave energy of the midwoofer is channeled down a labyrinth where unwanted frequencies are damped by British Dodo mat and acoustic foam. The output of the line of the TX5s is tuned to 48 Hz. The Foundtech pure ribbon tweeter is normally reserved for much more expensive speakers. It's highly unusual to find it on speakers that retail for less than £2,000. The crossover is top draw 2 with wire-wound resistors from Mundorf and Denton Audio. A Solon polypropylene capacitor has been selected on the bass circuit for speed and smooth mids. It combines with the larger air core inductor from Janssen to form a 12 dB per octave second order slope. A combination of Janssen and Denton Audio capacitors are used on the tweeter circuit, again with a Janssen air core inductor, this time forming an 18 dB per octave third order slope. The small white bypass cap from Bavenby has quick discharge to enhance performance from the Foundtech tweeter. I'm less impressed with the selection of the midwoofer. It's a fairly standard composite cone driver from Peerless with a mediocre sized magnet structure. That's why the TX5s are pretty lightweight for their size. I know that midwoofer has been selected to keep the price down, and it's not a bad driver. It's just that the cabinet, tweeter and crossover are so much more impressive, it doesn't seem to fit. Let's hope it doesn't place too much of a limit on performance. The Alchris TX5s remind me of some much more expensive speakers that I love. The £5,000 Alta audio Alyssas that I currently have on long-term loan also have a Foundtech ribbon tweeter and transmission line base loading. I even like their individual cabinet styling. The Kerr Acoustic K300 Mark IIIs look similar to the Alchris TX5s, however a larger Foundtech ribbon tweeter, much more substantial ScanSpeak Revelator midwoofer and Baltic birch plywood cabinet push the price up to £6,395 a pair. Those are the two finest sounding speakers I've reviewed on this channel as yet, and that's why I got excited about these Alchris speakers. They're so close in design to the Kerrs in particular. Could they get near the performance for less than a third of the price? Well, the bass articulation is the best I've heard from any speaker below £3,000, not as dynamic as the Altas or the Kerrs, but the TX5s play almost as clean and deep. Transmission lines once again impart their magic. Bass weight is again very well judged and sits nicely in balance with the mid-range, which is almost faultless. As for the high frequencies, well again, it's the best I've encountered in this class, but unfortunately that midwoofer runs out of puff when you start to crank things up. Above 90 decibels, it's getting shouty. I've encountered this before. The £1,999 Monitor Audio Studio 89s are also very articulate speakers that suffer from dynamic compression at higher volumes. They have a leaner tone and can't match the TX5s for bass extension. The TX5s play great at low and moderate listening levels though, but if you're buying these transmission line speakers to turn them up and have the bass lines hit you in the chest, you're going to be disappointed. Comparisons with my reference £1,800 quad speakers are interesting. The Revela ones certainly don't have everything their own way. The Alchris speakers have the deeper, cleaner bass, less bleed through to the mid-range and even more airy highs, and that's saying something because the quads are superb in those areas. But the Revela ones will play louder and have the fuller, richer, more textured mid-range. That's where the TX5s are a little bit inconsistent. The human voice is very well expressed, as evidenced playing Misty Mountains by Richard Armitage, a track taken from Peter Jackson's The Hobbit movie, when the dwarfs turn up unannounced at Bilbo Baggins' house. It's great to demo the tone, texture and separation of male vocals. Somewhere further up the mid-range, I suspect there's a bit of a dip. Brass instruments in particular sound a shade thin, but I should point out these are minor gripes. That said though, it's the quad Revela ones that sound like the more balanced speakers. They also reveal a little bit more subtle micro details and textures to notes. However, the Foundtech tweeter is more subtle and detailed than the quad Revela ones, giving nothing away to the much more expensive Alta audio Alyssas and the Kerr Acoustics K300 Mark IIIs. Not surprising when the same brand of tweeter is used in all three speakers and the crossover parts are of similar quality. As for sound staging and imaging, yeah, it's great, wide and deep and nicely layered. Not as pinpoint as the Altas and the Kerrs, but on a par with my quad Revela ones. But to hear all of this does take a little bit of work. A ribbon tweeter has a very wide lateral dispersion but narrow vertical dispersion. That's quite different to a dome or a comb, which is fairly even in all directions. The result is an off-axis performance that's a bit challenging, and that makes the TX5s a bit finicky with positioning. You want the tweeters pretty close to ear height and the speakers away from wall boundaries to keep the bass tight. The distance between the speakers significantly alters the thickness in the lower mid-range, and they're sensitive to the toe-in angle as well. My advice is, if you don't have the ability to play around quite a bit with the speaker position and to some extent the listening position, stick to designs that have a more even off-axis performance. I'm talking about control directivity speakers here. A lot of dual concentric designs fall into this category, as well as some but not all horn speakers and those that have tweeters with substantial waveguides. However, the TX5s are very easy to drive, more dynamic and in control when paired with my Exposure 2510 than the quad Revela ones and my vintage ProAct Response 1 SEs for that matter. As long as the sound pressure levels are kept within the capabilities of the speaker, that's a nice pairing. The soundstage opened up further with my Hegel H190, but it was tonally dry and dynamically flat, as if the mid-woofer was overdamped. The leanness above the vocal region with some instruments was also more obvious. I'd stick with amplifiers on the warmer side. I'd love to try them with some of the Atoll amplifiers or a musical Fidelity A1. The nice thing about tube amps is that you can change the sound. I swapped out my usual PS Vane T2 Collection KT88 power tubes on my Wilsonton R8 for replica vintage Philips EL34s. There was some softening to the leading edge of notes, but the Alchris speakers responded well to the greater harmonic saturation that these tubes provided. The TX5s are rated at 90 decibel sensitivity into an 8 ohm load, and I expect the impedance is pretty flat. Even my £349 Cambridge Audio AXA35 drove them reasonably well, despite having a modest power supply. The new Riga Brio Mark 7 is in for review. I've only started listening tests, but it's a suitable starting point for the TX5s that doesn't break the bank at £799. I'll reveal more in my upcoming review. Yes, you'll get more fidelity, scale, dynamics and control with better quality amplification, but it just goes to show you don't need a lot of power or muscle to drive these speakers. It's personally fulfilling for me to discover products from small brands that exceed expectations in so many areas. The Alchris TX5s have cabinets, tweeters and crossover components beyond what the establishment offer in this market segment. Transmission line speakers are coveted for the depth and clarity in their bass, and the TX5s deliver as long as listening levels are kept to low and moderate levels. As for the articulation in the highs, it's on par with the best speakers at 3 times this price. I suspected that the modest mid-woofer may hold the TX5s back, and I was right. Clarity, composure and refinement all suffer when the listening peaks exceed 90 decibels, and for some people that isn't that loud, but a little crossover tweak and the replacement of the mid-woofer to something that's of comparable standard to the rest of the components will not only improve SPL levels, it may well take performance ahead of the class leaders. I'd love to see that happen, but as is, these are very nice speakers. The Alchris Audio TX5s get a highly recommended from this channel. My question for today is, if there's one thing you could change about a product that you really like, what would it be? Please let me know in the comment section. I'm sure you know what to do by now if you want to support me here on what I do. Like, share, subscribe, hit the bell notification. Check me out on Patreon. There's a couple of tiers you can access there if you think I can help you on your audiophile journey. Also check out the ABA Club on Patreon, which has some great ways to interact with me and fellow Patreons. But for today, for now, a British audiophile, signing off.